My name's Emory. And if you're wondering whether that's my real name, it is. Because I don't feel the need to hide anymore. Not after what happened. Not after I walked away from the life I was building with her and learned what it means to start over when everything feels hollow. We were exactly 37 days away from our wedding when I first noticed the change. Her name was Lorna, not the kind of name you hear every day, I know. But it suited her. There was always something offbeat about her, something that made people lean in when she spoke. She had this quiet way of commanding attention without even trying. And I fell hard. I think I fell before I even realized I had stepped. Lorna and I met at a mutual friend's art exhibit downtown. She was standing alone in front of a painting of a child staring out a window, and I remember she whispered, "You can almost hear what she's thinking." That one sentence turned into a 3-hour conversation, which led to dinner, and soon, we were inseparable. For nearly 2 years, it felt like we were growing in sync. She'd doodle little hearts in my notebook. I'd bring her coffee when she had late shifts. We'd talk about everything: fears, dreams, what kind of dog we wanted, what color we'd paint the kitchen in our first home. It felt real, honest, safe, until it didn't. It started with little things. She stopped texting back right away. She used to send me photos of her lunch or random thoughts during the day, and then suddenly, silence. Or she'd respond hours later with something vague like, "Sorry, busy day." The warmth in her eyes began to fade. The way she used to reach for my hand in public, it stopped. She stopped making plans for the future. Our wedding binder collected dust on the coffee table, untouched for weeks. I told myself it was stress. Cold feet. Everyone goes through this before a wedding, right? But deep down, something gnawed at me. A voice I didn't want to hear kept whispering, "She's pulling away." Then came the night that still plays in slow motion behind my eyes. It was a Thursday. I remember that clearly, because I'd just come back from a meeting with our florist. I had spent the afternoon picking out the exact shade of blue that matched her favorite earrings, the one she wore on our first date. When I got home, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Her shoes were gone. Her coat. Even her perfume didn't linger in the air the way it usually did. At first, I thought maybe she was out running errands. I called her. No answer. Texted. Nothing. Around 9 p.m., she finally replied with just 3 words. Out with friends. No explanation. No apology for disappearing. Just that. I stared at that message for a long time. Something about it felt off. I don't know how to explain it. It was like the words weren't from her. Or maybe they were, but from a version of her I hadn't met yet. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found a tagged photo of her online from someone I didn't know. She was at a party. A wild one. Flashing lights, loud music, people dancing like they were trying to forget who they were. And there she was, Lorna, wearing a dress I'd never seen before, laughing with a group of strangers. One of the guys had his arm around her. She looked free. Too free. Like the woman in that photo didn't have a fiancé at home agonizing over flower arrangements and rental chairs. I felt sick. But I didn't confront her right away. I told myself I was being dramatic. Maybe it was just a night out. Maybe I was the one overthinking everything. Maybe she just needed to blow off some steam before the wedding. But my heart knew better. For the next few days, she acted like nothing had happened. Kissed me on the cheek, asked me to pick up more oat milk, mentioned how excited her mom was for the rehearsal dinner. But I couldn't get the image out of my head. That version of her carefree, wild, detached, it wasn't the Lorna I fell in love with. Or maybe it was. And I just never saw it. I sat with it for a while. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I didn't beg for the truth. I just watched, listened, waited. And when the silence between us became louder than the lies, I made a choice. I canceled the wedding. But I didn't just cancel the wedding. I vanished. People think that when someone walks away from their own wedding, it's some dramatic scene, yelling, breaking things, throwing a ring across the room. That's not how it happened for me. The reality was quieter, heavier, like I was underwater while everyone else kept breathing just fine. After seeing that photo of Lorna at the party, something in me shut down. I didn't say anything right away, not because I was afraid of confrontation. Trust me, I've had my share of tough conversations, but because I wanted to be sure. Not sure about her, but sure about myself. I needed to know that I wasn't making decisions based on anger or ego, but on truth. On the feeling in my gut that had been slowly tearing at me for weeks. I didn't want to become the bitter guy who jumped to conclusions. I wanted to be the man who chose dignity when everything inside him screamed for answers. The weekend after the party, we had brunch with her parents. I watched her sit beside me, laugh with her father, talk about centerpieces with her mom, like everything was perfectly fine. And maybe that was the moment I knew for sure. Because if you can look someone in the eye and pretend you're still theirs, after walking out on them in the middle of wedding planning to go live some other version of your life, that's not forgetfulness. That's a choice. A silent, deliberate betrayal. I still remember the moment I reached the edge of the line. We were in the living room a few days later, flipping through channels like strangers who had nothing left to say. I glanced at her and asked, casually, "Do you think you'll ever want to go clubbing again after we're married?" She looked up at me and laughed, not warmly, not lovingly, but like my question was ridiculous. Clubbing? Emory, that part of my life is over. I don't even like that scene anymore. And there it was. The lie. She could say those words, while a dozen images still lived on someone's Instagram page showing her at that party, her arms around someone else, her smile too wide for someone who was supposed to be mine. I didn't reply. I just nodded. And in that silence, I began to mentally pack my things. But I didn't storm out that night. I didn't sleep on a friend's couch or text her some dramatic message. What I did instead was invisible. I began making backups of my documents. I deleted our shared calendar. I quietly removed my name from a few delivery apps and mailing lists. I found a temporary rental 3 cities over, furnished, discreet, nothing fancy. I used a private email to contact the wedding planner and cancel our contract. I sent polite notes to vendors saying we decided to delay the ceremony indefinitely. And through it all, she never noticed. Or maybe she did, but didn't ask. That was the hardest part. The silence. The fact that the woman I was supposed to marry didn't even realize I was already halfway out the door. 3 nights before I left, we sat on the couch together, and she rested her head on my shoulder. We were watching some romantic comedy she liked. And I just stared ahead, wondering how many more times I'd sit beside someone who could lie so easily and still feel comfortable in my arms. It wasn't just about the party. It was what the party represented. That she had another side, one I wasn't invited into. That while I was planning to give her the rest of my life, she was trying on someone else's for the weekend. So I did it. I waited until she left to get her nails done one afternoon. I packed 2 bags, left the ring on the kitchen counter, and placed a letter beside it. I didn't insult her. I didn't accuse. I just said the truth, that something had broken between us, and I couldn't be the only one trying to hold it together. That trust is built on more than silence, and I couldn't build a life with someone whose words and actions lived in 2 different worlds. Then I walked out. Quiet. Steady. No slamming doors. No looking back. It's been weeks now. I haven't heard from her. Not really. She sent one message. "Where are you? Can we talk?" That was it. No apology. No explanation. And honestly, I think that hurts more than anything she could have said. Because silence, in moments like that, is an answer. And I've decided I'll keep walking. The first night in the new apartment felt like standing on the surface of the moon, familiar in theory, but eerily uninhabitable. The place was a furnished studio in a sleepy neighborhood where no one knew my name, which was exactly what I wanted. No decorations. No colors. Just beige walls, a lamp with a shaky switch, and the soft buzz of an ancient refrigerator that hummed louder than any voice I'd heard in days. I dropped my bags by the door, sat on the corner of the creaky bed, and just stared at the blank wall across from me. It was the first time in over 2 years that I didn't have to consider anyone else's schedule, mood, or expectations. And yet, instead of feeling free, I felt hollow. That first week was strange. I worked remotely, thankfully. My job didn't require me to explain my personal life to anyone. I took walks at odd hours and stopped answering texts from mutual friends. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I didn't post some dramatic farewell or make a cryptic Instagram story. I didn't want revenge or attention. I just wanted distance from her, from what we were building, from the version of myself that thought everything was okay. You know what's funny? I still made the coffee exactly the way she liked it, oat milk, cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of raw sugar. I didn't even realize I was doing it until halfway through the 2nd cup. That morning, I stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding the mug, realizing it was never really mine. Just like so much of the life I'd been living. It had been tailored to fit her preferences, her moods, her rhythms. And somehow, in the process of loving her, I had started vanishing long before I physically disappeared. Nights were the worst. I couldn't fall asleep without imagining how she must have reacted when she walked in and found the letter. Did she cry? Did she even read it? Did she go straight into damage control? Or did she laugh and call it dramatic? There were 100 versions of her in my head, and each one felt farther from the girl I used to know. I wanted to stop caring, but the silence was louder than any confrontation ever could have been. It was on the 7th night, exactly 1 week since I left, that I decided to go for a midnight drive. I didn't know where I was headed, just that I needed to be in motion. The streets were empty, what with the kind of soft drizzle that makes everything blur. I passed a gas station we used to stop at for snacks after late movies. The flickering sign, the dim light above Pump 3, it all pulled something out of me I wasn't ready to face. I pulled over and just sat in the parking lot, engine off, staring at nothing. That's when I saw it. A car just like hers, same make, same model, even the same dent near the back bumper that I'd begged her to get fixed for a year. My heart jumped. It wasn't her, of course. Just some stranger who happened to drive a similar car. But the ache that rose in my chest caught me off guard. I wasn't missing her, not really. I was mourning the version of her I had built in my head. The woman who would never have lied, never have gone to that party, never have looked so carefree with someone else's arm around her. That version was never real, just a mirage I kept believing in because I wanted it to be true. When I got back to the apartment, I did something I hadn't done since the night I left. I opened my email. There were 6 unread messages from her. The first one had a simple subject line, please. I clicked through each one, heart racing, unsure of what I wanted to find, regret, anger, a confession, but there was nothing. Just short, empty messages. Emory, I don't know what happened. Please talk to me. I miss you. I'm scared. Can we fix this? Why won't you answer? They weren't evil. They weren't manipulative. They were flat. Like a badly acted scene in a movie where the lines don't match the emotion. She never mentioned the party, never acknowledged the photos, never explained why she lied when I asked about that night. And that told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't ready to face it. And I wasn't going back to a world where the truth had to be excavated with a chisel and hammer. I didn't reply. Instead, I deleted the thread, closed my laptop, and for the first time in weeks, slept straight through the night. Not peacefully. Not without dreams, but without regret. I was starting to feel something I hadn't expected, the slow return of my own voice. And that terrified me more than anything. Because once you start hearing yourself clearly, you can never go back to the silence you once lived in. There's a strange kind of stillness that settles in your bones after you walk away from the person you thought would be your forever. It's not relief, and it's not exactly grief either. It's something in between. Like the emotional version of muscle memory. Your body remembers reaching for someone who's no longer there. Your hand twitches toward where they'd usually be on the couch. You buy 2 forks when you only need one. And the worst part? You keep doing these things long after you've accepted that they're gone. Or, more accurately, that you're gone. The apartment, if you could even call it that, had started to feel less like a hiding place and more like a waiting room. I didn't decorate. Not because I wanted to hold on to sadness, but because I was afraid of making this space too permanent. It was like if I put up a picture or bought a plant, I'd be declaring that this was my new normal. And I wasn't ready for that yet. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Closure? Direction? The pain to feel a little less sharp when I thought about her? All I knew was that I needed more time. Time without the noise of apologies that weren't really apologies, or the exhausting dance of pretending everything was okay. It had been 19 days since I vanished. I'd stopped counting on purpose, but the number always found its way back into my mind. Every morning, I woke up a little earlier than I needed to, not because I was full of energy, but because I couldn't stand lying in bed with nothing but the sound of my own thoughts. So I got up. I moved. Sometimes I jogged. Sometimes I walked to the nearby bakery and sat there with a cup of bitter coffee, pretending to read the paper while quietly studying the way people interacted, the casual intimacy of a couple sharing a croissant. The way a mother gently wiped crumbs off her child's cheek. A man nervously checking his phone like he was waiting for someone who might not show. These quiet moments of life going on, they reminded me that the world didn't stop spinning just because my heart cracked open. But the thing that really started shifting me, the thing that I never saw coming, was how I started to notice my own reflection again. Not just in mirrors, but in who I was becoming. I realized that for so long, I had been adapting to her orbit. Don't get me wrong, that's not an accusation. Love is compromise, sure. But somewhere along the way, my identity had gotten blurred. I had stopped playing the guitar because she said it gave her headaches. I gave up Sunday hiking because she preferred brunch spots and downtown strolls. I even started using words she liked, changed how I laughed, filtered how I dressed. And it wasn't that she asked me to. She didn't. But when you love someone deeply, you often do these things without noticing, one small piece at a time, until you look in the mirror and see someone vaguely familiar, but not entirely you. There was a dusty guitar case in the corner of my closet. I hadn't opened it in months, maybe longer. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it, debating whether it would even feel right in my hands anymore. And then, one evening, without thinking too hard about it, I took it out. The strings were rusty. It was out of tune, but when I strummed that first awkward chord, something clicked. It sounded awful, like a beginner trying too hard, but I didn't care. It was mine. My sound. My hands. My moment. I played until my fingers hurt, then kept going, not because I was any good, but because it reminded me I still existed outside of who I had been with her. That night, I wrote a song, not a good one, but it bled honesty. It wasn't about betrayal or heartbreak. It wasn't even about her. It was about emptiness. About sitting in a room that used to feel foreign and realizing you finally stopped reaching for ghosts. Funny thing is, I didn't cry that night. I thought I would. I thought strumming out those feelings would break the dam. But all I felt was quiet, not silence, but peace. A different kind of stillness. Like I'd finally made room for myself in a space I had been tiptoeing through for weeks. And that's when the email came. No subject line. No words in the body. Just one attachment. A photo. Her. Standing in our old kitchen. The counter behind her bare. The ring, the one I left, back on the counter beside her phone. She looked tired. Like someone who hadn't slept in days. But her eyes, they were clear. Sad, yes, but not desperate. Not pleading. Just waiting. I didn't open it right away. I stared at the preview, unsure of what she meant by sending it. Was it closure? Was it a message? Or was it simply a mirror, her way of saying, I'm still here, but I know you're not. I didn't write back. Instead, I closed the laptop, put my guitar back in the case, and walked to the bakery before it closed. This time, I brought a notebook. Because I realized I wasn't just writing music. I was writing my way back to who I used to be. It's strange how some of the most painful memories don't come from the dramatic moments, not the yelling, the fights, or the final goodbyes, but from the soft, quiet details of everyday life. The scent of a candle you didn't even like but learned to tolerate because she loved it. The scratchy edge of a blanket you both fought over on movie nights. The particular corner of a cabinet where she kept her favorite tea. These are the ghosts that stay. Not the person, not their voice, not even their betrayal, but the shape they left in the spaces you still walk through. It had been over a month since I left, and in that time, I had spoken to no one about what happened. Not my parents, not my closest friend from college, not even Jamie, my coworker who used to ask me for wedding updates during our Monday morning check-ins. I wasn't avoiding people to be mysterious or dramatic. I was avoiding them because I knew they'd ask me the one question I didn't have the answer to. Why didn't you just talk to her? And I get it. To most people, that's what grown-ups do. You sit down, you talk, you ask for explanations, you cry a little, maybe even yell, and then you either patch things up or you walk away with closure. But life doesn't always give you that cinematic arc. Sometimes you realize, quietly, slowly, that the person you're with is choosing something that doesn't include you. Not with malice, not with intention. Just with neglect. And how do you argue with neglect? How do you confront silence? So I didn't. I chose distance over damage. But that didn't mean I was healed. Far from it. One morning, I made the mistake of walking past the street where our wedding venue was. I hadn't meant to go there. I was running errands, trying to find a new pair of boots after mine completely gave up during a rainstorm the night before. I took a turn without thinking, and there it was, that old converted church with the stone arch and the ivy growing along the side. The place where we were supposed to say our vows. I stood across the street, frozen. The weathered sign still had the same hand-painted lettering. I remembered how Lorna had smiled when she first saw it and said, "It's not perfect, but it's ours." I think that moment, more than any other, made me believe we were going to make it. Because neither of us had perfect childhoods, perfect families, perfect lives, but we were supposed to be building something that didn't need to be flawless, just honest. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. Just standing there was enough to remind me of everything we'd almost had. And also, what we never really did. That afternoon, I went home and took a long, hard look around the apartment. Not just at the physical space, but at the way I had filled it, or more accurately, how I hadn't. I'd been floating in this limbo between grief and self-preservation. Between wanting to disappear and wanting to grow. And for the first time since leaving, I realized I had a choice. I could keep surviving quietly in a place untouched by anyone. Or I could start participating in my own life again. So I made a list. It was small, basic, not some grand bucket list or dramatic reinvention plan. Just things that felt mine. Take a weekend trip alone. Learn how to cook something other than grilled cheese. Say yes to coffee with a friend, even if it's awkward. Find a used bookstore. Play a song in public. Even badly. Buy something completely unnecessary, just because it makes me smile. Write a letter, not to her, but to myself. Over the next few weeks, I started ticking them off. Slowly, clumsily. The trip was short, just 2 nights in a quiet coastal town where I listened to the ocean and didn't speak to anyone. The cooking was laughable at first, but there was something cathartic about burning the edges of a new recipe and not having anyone to impress. The bookstore was a gem tucked between a closed-down dry cleaner and a nail salon that always smelled like acetone and roses. I bought 3 books I probably won't finish, but it didn't matter. They looked good stacked on the table. And the letter, that one took the longest. When I finally wrote it, I didn't plan to. I had been journaling randomly, scribbling half-thoughts and snippets of lyrics that probably made no sense out of context. Then one morning, I woke up, sat at the small desk by the window, and started writing to the version of me who had almost gone through with the wedding. The version who stayed quiet even when things felt off. Who saw the shift in her eyes and convinced himself it was just stress. Who wanted to believe that love could conquer disconnection. I told him I was proud of him. I told him he made the right choice. Not because walking away was easy, it wasn't, but because it was honest. And when everything else gets stripped away, that's all you really have left. That afternoon, I got another email from her. This time, it had words. Just 2 sentences. I understand now why you left. I wish you had told me sooner. And for once, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel much of anything, really, just a soft, distant ache, like the soreness after a long hike. It wasn't her fault she didn't see it then. We were both playing roles in a story neither of us knew how to finish. She wanted freedom. I wanted truth. Neither of us knew how to ask for both. I didn't reply. Not because I hate her. Not because I'm still hurt. But because I had finally found something that took me months to recognize. Peace. Not the dramatic kind where you burn bridges and scream into the night, but the quiet kind. The kind that slips in slowly and stays. I hadn't planned to see her again. Honestly, I thought I never would. Not out of anger or fear, just because I believed that part of my life was over. When I walked away, I truly walked away. I didn't lurk on her socials. I didn't drive past our old place. I didn't ask friends for updates. I thought I had reached the final chapter of that book, closed it, and quietly shelved it behind me. But life has this habit of throwing chapters at you when you think the story is done. And sometimes, the ending you thought you already read shows up in the flesh, wearing a sweater you once bought and holding a cup of coffee like nothing ever broke between you. It was a random Saturday. I had gone to this new farmer's market just outside the city, not for the produce, but for the live music. A friend of mine, Chris, was performing, and after weeks of dodging social invitations, I finally gave in. I was doing better, actually, truly better. I had started volunteering twice a week at a small animal shelter. I'd picked up my guitar more regularly. I even laughed again, not the polite, hollow laugh that people give when they're trying to seem okay, but real, involuntary laughter that bubbled up without my permission. That day, the sun was out but not overbearing. The sky was one of those deep, clean blues that makes you believe in starting over. I was holding a paper cup filled with sweet tea, listening to Chris strum through a cover of a song we used to play back in college, when I heard her voice. Not clearly. Not at first. It was the kind of soft sound that drifts past you before it hits you in the chest. And when I turned, there she was. Lorna. Hair shorter. Face a little thinner. Same eyes, but heavier. For a moment, we just stared at each other like strangers on opposite sides of a mirror. She looked stunned, but not in a guilty or anxious way, more like someone who didn't expect to run into a memory she thought she'd buried. Her mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. And maybe it's because I had rehearsed this moment in my head so many times, what I would say, how I would stand, how much strength I'd show, that when it actually happened, I didn't say anything either. We just stood there, breathing the same air. And then I did something I hadn't expected. I smiled. It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't laced with hidden meanings. It was just a smile, quiet, calm, accepting. That's when she walked over. Slowly. Hesitantly. Like someone who wasn't sure if the bridge had already burned or if maybe, just maybe, there was still a way across. She said, "You look different." I replied, "I feel different." There was a pause, the kind that would have been unbearable months ago. But now, it just felt like space. Space for things that didn't need to be rushed. She asked if I had a minute. I didn't say yes or no. I just walked with her. No expectations. No hidden hopes. Just curiosity. We sat on the edge of a fountain near the parking lot. The water made this soft, repetitive sound that almost felt like a heartbeat. She started to speak, stumbled at first, and then told me everything I didn't know. About the night of the party. About how she had felt trapped, suffocated by the idea of a life she wasn't ready to live. How she had gone to that party not to cheat or lie, but to feel like herself again, even if it was a version she wasn't proud of. She admitted she hadn't told me the truth because she didn't know what the truth was at the time. That it wasn't until I left that she realized how much I had been giving while she had been disappearing. And then she said the words I never thought I'd hear from her. You were right to leave. I didn't cry. Neither did she. It wasn't that kind of moment. There were no dramatics. No scene. No begging or accusing or rehashing every wound. Just two people sitting on a stone bench, quietly acknowledging the space between who they were and who they had become. She asked if I hated her. I told her no. She asked if I missed her. I said, I missed who I thought you were. That wasn't meant to hurt her. It was just the truth. A quiet, honest truth. Before we parted ways, she handed me something, a folded piece of paper. Don't read it now, she said. Only if you want to. Only when you're ready. I nodded. We didn't hug. We didn't exchange numbers. There was no promise of reconnecting. Just a final look. A mutual understanding. That night, I sat in my apartment, the same one that had once felt like exile, and unfolded the letter. It wasn't long. Just a page and a half, handwritten, her familiar cursive looping through the words. She thanked me. Not for the relationship. Not even for the love. But for the leaving. For walking away when I did. For not forcing her to explain what she didn't yet understand. For giving her the space to become the person she's still learning to be. And at the bottom, she wrote one last sentence. You didn't lose me. I was never truly there. I read that line over and over. Not with anger. Not with regret. With peace. Because she was right. And I was finally ready to be somewhere I truly belonged, not in her story, not in the idea of who we could have been. But in my own life. The one I was finally learning how to live. After that encounter at the market, something inside me shifted. I didn't realize it at first, not in a dramatic, movie scene way, but slowly, like a fog lifting you didn't know you were walking through. I went home that day, and didn't fall apart. I didn't sit on the edge of the bed and replay every word. I didn't ask myself what could have been or whether we had just misread the timing. I didn't even cry. I just stood by the window, looking out at the street below, and I felt something I hadn't in a long, long time. Stillness. Not numbness. Not shock. Just stillness. As if the turbulence that had defined the last few months had finally lost interest in me. In that stillness, I started noticing things I'd been too emotionally distracted to see before. The neighbor across the hall always left a small glass of water beside his doormat, and I'd never known why until I watched a stray cat lap from it every morning like it was part of a secret routine. The barista at the cafe I'd been frequenting started writing small quotes on the side of my cup, and I realized I'd been so stuck in my own head that I hadn't even noticed her doing it for weeks. You don't have to rebuild everything at once. One cup read. Even leaves take seasons to grow back. That one got to me. Because in some unspoken way, that's what I'd been trying to do. Rebuild everything all at once. Reconstruct my identity from the ruins of a failed engagement. Redefine purpose in a single grocery run or therapy session. Find closure in a song lyric or a polite nod across a fountain. But healing doesn't work that way. It's not a checklist. It's not a 5-step plan or a milestone you celebrate with champagne. It's messy, quiet, invisible. And so I stopped trying to measure it. Instead, I started showing up for it. Every morning, I'd write something down, not a journal entry, not a diary, just one sentence. Some days it was profound. Most days it wasn't. You're not broken, you're just shifting. She was the mirror, but you were the reflection. Today is coffee and clarity, not answers. These weren't for anyone else. I didn't post them. I didn't share them. I just wrote them on small pieces of paper and tucked them into a jar I kept on the windowsill. A jar that, over time, began to fill with reminders that I was still here. That I was, in fact, still becoming. One afternoon, a package showed up at my door. I hadn't ordered anything. No return label. No note. Just a simple, unassuming cardboard box. Inside was a book, Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. I opened the cover and found a single post-it note that read, Page 47. When I turned to it, the words felt like someone had cracked open my own chest and written down what they found. Let everything happen to you. Beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. I never did find out who sent it. I didn't ask. Some things, I've learned, are better left unanswered. Not because the answer wouldn't matter, but because the mystery itself carries its own kind of grace. Around that same time, I started running again. I used to run with Lorna, back when everything felt new. But we did it more for photos than for passion. Sunrise selfies. Scenic trails for Instagram stories. We were curating a life, not really living it. But now, the runs were different. No headphones. No route. No expectations. Just my feet on the pavement, breath heavy, thoughts tumbling freely in whatever direction they wanted. And it was during one of those runs, out near the lake just before dusk, that I finally understood something I hadn't been able to put into words until then. It wasn't just that she went to that party. It was that she didn't invite me into the truth of her life. And maybe, for a long time, I hadn't invited her into mine either. We both kept secrets. Mine were the ones I told myself. The ways I downplayed my loneliness, dismissed the hollow places in our conversations, ignored the instincts that told me something was off. Hers were the parts of her life she didn't want scrutinized, the desires she couldn't explain, the freedom she thought she had to sacrifice to be with me. And neither of us had the courage to say out loud, "This isn't working." So I did it with my silence. I left not to hurt her, but because I didn't want to become the kind of man who shrinks himself just to keep someone close. And I think, deep down, she understood that. One night, weeks after our unexpected meeting, I got another letter. Handwritten. No return address. But this one wasn't from her. It was from her father. I almost didn't read it. We hadn't spoken since the engagement fell apart. He'd always been quiet around me, more reserved than judgmental. I opened it expecting anger. Or worse, disappointment. But what I found was grace. He wrote, "You don't owe anyone an explanation, Emory. But I wanted you to have one. Not for her actions, but for mine. I never said it aloud, but I saw how much you loved her. I saw it in the way you waited for her to speak when she was overwhelmed, in the way you softened your voice when she spiraled, in the way you looked at her like she was a world, not just a woman. I don't know what happened. I don't need to. But I want you to know, from one man to another, sometimes loving someone also means knowing when to walk away." I folded that letter slowly, carefully, and I placed it into the same jar as all my small sentences. Because it didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like the middle. A quiet middle. One where I finally knew who I was without her. And more importantly, who I was becoming because of it. I didn't wake up one morning and suddenly feel healed. There was no cinematic sunrise, no dramatic inner shift, no lightning bolt epiphany. What actually happened was this. I woke up on a Tuesday, poured my coffee, and realized that I wasn't thinking about her anymore. Not in a bitter way. Not in a romantic way. Just not at all. And that's when I knew the story was finally over. Not because I forced it to end. Not because someone handed me closure like a wrapped gift. But because the weight I had been carrying for months, maybe longer, had slowly dissolved into something lighter. Something more manageable. It hadn't vanished. Pain rarely does. But it had transformed into understanding. And from there, into peace. That morning, I got in my car and drove out to the place I'd avoided all year, the town where we were supposed to get married. I had no reason to go. No one to see. But something in me wanted to walk those streets again, not to reopen wounds, but to prove to myself that I could stand in that space and not fall apart. I parked near the venue, the old stone church we had chosen for its imperfect charm. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Instead, I sat on a bench across the street, watched the ivy curling up the walls, and thought about how far I'd come since the last time I stood there, a man who had no idea that silence could be an answer, that distance could be a gift, that losing someone you love doesn't mean you lose yourself. It was there, in that quiet hour, that a family walked by, parents with 2 kids, laughing about something that didn't make sense to anyone but them. The mother dropped her keys, and I instinctively bent down to pick them up. She smiled. "Thanks, stranger." And I smiled back, not because of her, but because of what I felt in that moment. Present. Alive. Unburdened. That evening, I went home and did something I hadn't done since the breakup. I invited people over. Nothing big. Just a few close friends, pizza boxes, and an old Bluetooth speaker that barely worked. We didn't talk about her. We didn't talk about weddings or heartbreak or the past. We talked about books, bad TV, terrible exes, and where we thought we'd all be in 10 years. We laughed until our faces hurt. Someone spilled soda on the rug and no one cared. It was ordinary. Beautifully, painfully ordinary. And that's what made it perfect. After they left, I stood in the middle of the room, now slightly messier than before, and I realized I didn't want to move again. This apartment, once a shelter, then a waiting room, had somehow become a home. Not because of the walls or the layout or the rent, but because of who I had become inside of it. I walked over to the jar on the windowsill, the one filled with notes and fragments and little truths that had carried me through the hardest months of my life. I pulled out one at random. It said, "You can outgrow what broke you." And for the first time, I believed it. Not just in theory, but in practice. The next morning, I signed up for a local art class. Nothing serious, just something that had been in the back of my mind for years. Something I had once mentioned to her, and she had laughed gently. "You? Painting?" I remember how I chuckled too, brushing it off, shrinking back into my box of predictability. But now? Now, there was no one to impress, no one to edit myself for. Just a blank canvas and a willingness to try. That class changed something in me. Not because I was good at it, I wasn't. But because it reminded me how beautiful it is to be a beginner again. To show up to something unfamiliar and say, "I'm here. I'm trying." That's enough. Over the next few weeks, I met people. Real people. Not curated social media versions. Not couples playing house. Just folks learning how to be themselves again. We didn't talk about pasts. We talked about ideas, memories, favorite colors, favorite failures. One of them, her name was Mara, had this calm energy about her, like she'd seen storms and chosen stillness anyway. We ended up walking home from class together one night, talking about nothing and everything. The kind of conversation that feels like a breeze slipping through a window you didn't know was open. There was no spark. There was no moment. But there was connection. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I don't know where things are headed. I'm not rushing to define anything. What I do know is this. I no longer feel like half a person waiting to be completed. I feel whole. Slightly cracked. Beautifully flawed. But whole. Lorna? I wish her well. Truly. I hope she found whatever it was she was chasing. I hope she tells the truth now, not just to others, but to herself. I hope the next time she feels lost, she lets someone in before they have to walk away. We don't talk. We won't. And that's okay. Some people aren't meant to stay in your life. They're meant to change it. And that she did. So here I am, standing in the middle of a life I didn't plan, holding pieces I didn't expect, quietly grateful for everything that broke and everything that held me together. Because sometimes, the best kind of ending is the one that lets you begin again.